Welcome to this week's episode of the Evolve to Succeed podcast. This week's episode is a very special episode entitled The 12 Pods of Christmas. And for this episode, we're going to reflect on our favourite 12 podcasts from 2024. And we're going to show you some snippets from those podcasts so you can see why we like them so much and what we took from each and every one of those podcasts ourselves. During the course of the podcast, we're going to split the sections into four. So first off, we're going to cover entrepreneurs. We're then going to think about family businesses. Our third category is adventure and resilience. But before we finalise the podcast with a category of that employee to ownership journey. But what would a Christmas podcast be without snow and props? So, the first pod that we're going to talk about is my interview and discussion as we relaunched the podcast with Jeff Mostyn. Now, as a lifelong Bournemouth fan, I thought I was going to have a conversation about Bournemouth and football and that remarkable journey that Jeff and Eddie took the team on. And we did cover that, but actually what I got was a remarkable, and I mean remarkable life story. And during the course of the conversation and the snippets we're now going to show, Jeff talked about, what his start off in life and entrepreneurship was at a time in, when that term entrepreneurship didn't even exist. So please do enjoy these segments from the wonderful Jeff Mostyn.
I suppose that, there were many occasions when I was at school when I was bullied, a combination of my size, and there was quite a lot of anti-Semitism in Manchester and probably, nationally, but in particular, I found it quite difficult. And as you can imagine, now if you look at a curriculum and think, right, you're going to be bullied on a Tuesday at 11 o'clock, there's every chance you'd be joining me not at school.
Yeah, you do anything to avoid that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And with my passion being football, I used to go to watch Manchester United and Manchester City train, and then I'd collect autographs. And then when I did go back into school, I'd sell the autographs in order to get enough money to go to the matches. And then spent quite a lot of the time at the matches, not watching the game, but collecting programs so that I could take those back into school to sell those so that I could go to the next match. And again, quite amazing. You just do it naturally. I never thought that people today call that sort of entrepreneurial skills.
Yes.
But of course, we're talking about 1955 here, when I was around about 10, 11, 12. I don't think the word entrepreneur existed, even though there were, many entrepreneurs that we know now,
definitely,
making their way in life. So I suppose very early on, it sort of set the scene that, I had some form of business acumen that I didn't ever understand. Yeah. And it was never realised because I really didn't have the education. I'd never even been to Bournemouth before. So this was my first time in Bournemouth, was going to watch AFC Bournemouth play. We're in Division 1. And it was like a Victor Kiam moment, I walked through the door of the football club and little did I know that later on I was going to buy it. It just had a romance about it. I don't think I'd ever seen a game in, what was the third tier of English football before, even though City, had, also been there. Abdul introduced me to his fellow directors, associate directors, and I just thought, look, I've got some money now. This is an opportunity to get into something that I've always wanted to be involved in. I joke with people now, this wasn't at the time, but when people say, why did you buy a football club? I say, well, I'd always wanted to be a footballer. So I thought, if I buy a football club, I can pick myself and suddenly appear on the pitch, as a footballer. Well, why not? So it wasn't like that at all. So I got involved with the consortium. My vice chairman at the time, Steve Sly, local businessman. And by the time I bought the club eventually, and it wasn't an easy ride because we had the supporters trust who had the golden share. So we had to persuade them to give up that golden share, in order
trust in you guys as a
trust in
consultant.
us. And I remember when I think now, God, I don't know why I did it. I'm the one that's going to be putting the money in here. And I'm assuming the Toulouse-Lautrec position on my knees, in front of them, begging them to give up the share. Where, why would I be doing that? I think now everybody else should have been on their knees saying, thank, the Messiah's come, thank God, somebody's going to save the football club.
So one of the joys of this podcast is I get to have conversations with people that I wouldn't normally perhaps get to understand their story. And Matt Fleming is a great example of this. I've known Matt Fleming to say hello to as an acquaintance in some kind of way, shape or form for over 20 years, but I didn't know his story. And during the course of my conversation with Matt, so much came out about his journey, his story, what it was like for him, and that he wasn't even a good employee, and so much more. So these snippets that we've got from our conversation with Matt, I hopefully will give you some insights to his own special journey. When you look back now, do you think you're always destined to run your own business?
Yes. Yeah. I was an awful employee. I was incredibly difficult as an employee, and that self-confidence is a good thing up to a point, but every business needs people who are actually happy in their role and recognize their strengths and weaknesses probably better than I did. And I'm happy, I can think of some fantastic people inside. It's not Aylesworth Fleming anymore, it's AF Oliver these days, but some wonderful people inside AF Oliver, and you think they do a brilliant job, and they don't want to be promoted outside of their excellence, their level of excellence. Sometimes I think we do that too much. But the answer to your question is, I was just so difficult to be an employee.
Yeah, so determined and so focused and so
it was going to be
And obviously
some people might call it a pain in the arse, actually, to be fair. I think back to some of my
being kind, obviously.
Thank you, Warren, that is kind. But I think back to some of my earlier employers, and I think, they'd probably have a different take on that.
Yeah. How do you get your team to be good at building relationships? So the business, and you've done this very successfully, the business isn't you, the business is that team of 100 people.
Well, the key first thing, of course, is a really obvious one, and that is you build a relationship with them, don't you?
Yeah.
And there's no better way to demonstrate what you think important than your behaviour with them.
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse, is there, than people that look like nice people on the surface, but actually when you get back in the car and they're driving back to the office, they're awful.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always had this thing, again, another cliche. Never trust anyone that's nasty to waiters.
Yeah.
So if you're out with someone and they're smiling at you and telling you what a nice guy you are and all the rest of it, and then they're rude to the waiter or waitress or person, and you think that is just unacceptable, then, don't you? That for me, then,
I'm with you. You genuine.
Got it marked down.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be unhappy with service and all that sort of stuff, of course, but just being rude to people, I find that. So the answer to your question is
you and your team.
demonstrate, and let people know the importance of it, obviously. And it's bring energy as well. People love energy. There's a guy, I can't remember who it is. I can't claim it for my own. I wish I could. But there's the guy, I think he's the CEO of Microsoft. And he has this thing about two types of people in meetings. You can either be a zapper.
Yeah.
You zap a meeting with energy. You bring it all to life. Or a sapper. You sap energy. You suck the energy out of a room. And for me, that was brilliant. I think that's
zappers
so
true.
Like
that.
And we've all sat in meetings, haven't we? And you've all thought, you are sucking the energy out of this room.
Just before we show you the final segment from Matt, I just want to say one of the things I get asked quite a lot is, when's the right time to sell my business? And clearly the right advice is that you stop, you think about it, you plan a number of years ahead. And I think Matt did do some of that. But when that question got discussed during the course of our conversation, he gave some great insight as to why he knew it was time to sell his business.
Sometimes you have to do that sense check. And we had a great relationship, but I think we disturbed that, and I wasn't happy.
Okay.
And I always said that when I stopped looking forward to going into the office, I was going to stop going into the office. And it was a moment. And I remember ringing Peter on the way in that morning, 2015. I remember it ever so well. I remember getting out the show. I remember being making the decision in the shower. And I remember ringing Peter on the way into the office and saying, mate, I'm going to sell.
Okay.
And at that time, I owned 2/3 of the equity in the group. So it meant that, that would force us to do something.
Yeah.
It was a straightforward thing to do something.
I mean, that, having recently sold Inspire and been through that much journey yourself, you sometimes look back and I think, we sold to the right entity and we did the right thing. And I'd got to the point where the business needed new energy, new expertise, resource, technology was coming. We don't often have returning guests on the Evolve to Succeed podcast. It's just not something we do. But I do remember my original conversation with Rupert, and I was fascinated about his journey from dissatisfied chartered surveyor through to launching Conquer Spirit, and that whole journey as to why he did it and how it all came about. That when I heard he had had his 10th anniversary, I wanted him back on the podcast to really find out a bit more about what had happened in recent years, how the pandemic had affected his business, for better and for worse, and to understand where he was now on his journey and what was next for him. So please do enjoy these special snippets from Rupert.
Cost of living, basically people just not having that confidence in spending. So we saw that in our supermarkets and just people not going out.
So as the home buying dropped, the supermarket and hospitality didn't kick back in the same way.
No. So the hospitality is a shadow of what it was, unfortunately, pre-COVID, and that's not just from our business perspective, but I just remember going and meeting all the bartenders and the kind of appetite and excitement there was amongst bartenders and the culture in Bournemouth, and like there would be, bartenders from all over the world, like career bartenders who love making cocktails, and they've all either changed jobs and they're now plumbers, or they've gone back home onto the continent and changed their career direction. So it's a very different place. It's quite sad really, because as I say, it was quite buzzing, and I think actually COVID showed a lot of bartenders that there's an easier life out there from a 9 to 5. So you don't have to be up till 3 o'clock in the morning cleaning down and stuff like this. So as a business, we've had to work quite hard to like rebuild those relationships in the on trade. So, not only did we have a year and a half where we just couldn't go out and meet and do the same level of sort of events, but those people have gone.
And how do you personally, when it's your business and you see all of that going on, that's 2-3 years of quite a torrid time, find the belief and the resilience to keep going?
Good question. Pretty stubborn. I think there's there's a fundamental belief in what we do, and I think that that powers you through. But I would be lying if it wasn't moments throughout those last 3 years with COVID and the cost of living and the invasion of Ukraine, which just changed people's behaviours so much, where I didn't think, God, we've got to be really careful here. And that's quite a lot of pressure from a founder or an MD or anyone who's at the helm. Because you always feel like you're one wrong decision away from absolute catastrophe.
Is there a difference in the approach you need to take in building that local brand versus national? And does that cause any conflict ever?
There's two strategies to conquer. One is Dorset gin, and we call it painting Dorset yellow.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's simply owning Dorset, owning our hometown in gin.
Yeah.
Because gin is super regional and it's all about the locality of where it's made, and the brand is the coast, botanics, craft. The national piece is coffee. So that's why we rebranded our coffee liqueur 2 or 3 years ago. And because the coffee conversation, our Conquer Coffee Liqueur is about bringing barista quality, barista experience to the cocktail. It's not Dorset roasted coffee, handcrafted in copper stills in Bournemouth. It's nothing to do with Dorset, Bournemouth. It is once you look, they make it themselves, but the pitch and the value to you is espresso martinis without the coffee machine.
Yeah.
It's specialty grade ethical coffees.
Our final guest, which we're including in this entrepreneur category, is Paul Meyer. a larger-than-life character. Many of you may know Paul, and I thought, what Paul's going to come on this podcast? What am I going to learn from Paul during the course of our conversations? I knew there'd be some interesting stuff, but Paul came onto the podcast with great humility, sharing his story and the ups and the downs. And during the course of that conversation, he did reflect on the fact that during the course of running a business, it does change. It goes from wanting those financial rewards to needing and requiring, as you grow older in your business journey, more security. And there's some fascinating things that he has to say about this. And also, you know, the way in which our offices are changing post the pandemic. But the sales guy in you is driven by finance and money. And
very true. Very
and security,
true.
I assume.
Reward and security, again, as you get older, security becomes more. When you're younger, reward is more.
Yeah.
And all you want is
the shiny things, aren't you? And we've all been there again. The shiny things are great, aren't they?
Have you been there, Ron, with shiny things?
Yeah.
I have.
Yeah.
And again, I see these young guys online posting things about how successful they are and what they've got. And I find that crass. Hey, don't get me wrong, it's nice to have nice things, but it is quite crass.
Yeah.
And it's like rubbing people's noses in it and social bullying, I suppose.
Well, it is, isn't it? It's look at me, you could be like me, buy my course type thing. And there is no substance to the underlying business or individual or...
Exactly. There's no, trend. If you kick the front door and the whole house will fall down because there is no substance there.
How have you seen that? Well, post-pandemic, there's this kind of work from home, work in the office. What does a working office commercial environment need to look like? How's that changed? And what are perhaps some of the latest trends that we're seeing?
The latest trends. So how we found it change after the pandemic was everybody had been used to working at home. So they've come from working at home and then they've gone, we've got to go back to a drab, horrible office with poor breakout and kitchen facilities and there's no telly. So what we found, and it really did become prevalent, was people started having to make their office look a bit more homely and look a bit more what I'd call upmarket to A, attract staff, and B, to get people back to work.
Actually get them in and it'd be a great place for them to be.
Not going back there, it's drowdy and whatever else. So we've seen that, and there's a lot more design input now into offices. And again, we're doing 3D. So whereas we used to trump up with a little quote and say, look, it's going to look like this. You've got nothing to put on the table apart from a sort of 2D plan.
Of kind of where the desks are going to be.
It's a little drawing. Now, we've had to invest in 3D walkthroughs. We've had to invest in really intricate drawing equipment to make these things, because people haven't really got a lot of foresight on what it's going to look like. So that sort of things is evolving perhaps for the better.
Just before this final third segment from Paul, I just want to intervene and say Paul is a man of integrity as far as I'm concerned. He's got a great reputation in the marketplace. And therefore it was great for him to state on the podcast why he believes that reputation is everything.
And again, with everyday business, in our business, you have to keep the fire burning, and you've constantly got to be finding work to replace the work you're finishing. And again, that comes with a decent reputation. And for me, reputation is everything. And when you sit down and think about it, we're in a service industry with capital expenditure. Once a person's done their office once, unless you're really lucky, it's not going to happen for another 10, 15 years.
No.
So it's a constant process of just reinventing either new customers or just keep feeding the train.
So our second theme for this podcast is that of family businesses. And we've got two contrasting stories here. The first is of Liz and Layla Willingham of Liz Lean PR. And we're going to hear from them, both from their individual perspectives, about what it was like to come into a family business, and from Liz's perspective, what it was like for Layla to join the business. Please do enjoy. So Liz, were you ever nervous at bringing Layla into the business at such a young age?
Do you know, I wasn't at all. I look back and think, no, I was never concerned. I think it was such an organic process, really. She'd been in and out of the office all her life. She'd got to know the team. She'd help out at events. She'd come in during the school holidays occasionally. So her presence in the office wasn't alien to me on any level. And then I was getting feedback from the team about how well she was doing. the clients were starting to get some awareness and, contact with her, and they were saying nothing but good things. And so it just felt a very natural process. And selfishly, we've always wanted to get the best resource we could find. And now we're in a different world where we can fish from a much bigger pond, and we do, and we don't mind where people are based, and we have people all over the place. But back then, just to fish from this immediate pond for good PR minds was always a bit of a challenge. So actually to have a homegrown, someone that I could trust and knew that intuitively she got it, then actually it was an extra pair of hands and bring it on.
Yeah.
So
Brilliant.
no, I never had any concern. It's more recently that I've thought, we're really into we're in it now. We're in it. And I have often said to Layla, are you sure? This is the only business and environment you've worked in straight out of school. Are you sure? When you get the humps in the road, the challenges, the real stressful moments, you really want this?
Because I started almost unexpectedly, I think that set us on a very good path, because I didn't come in with the ambition to be Liz's successor. And I think that set us in good stead to run the process well. It's evolved organically, and it's meant that everyone's come with us on that journey organically. I think there'd be a real danger in going into a family business assuming that you will one day have that top role, because I don't think you know it in yourself until you've got halfway there. And I don't think it's right by the team. I very much always wanted to be part of the team, one of the team, working alongside people. Never wanted to be seen at any different level, and I very much wanted to earn my stripes. I suppose the only thing that's possibly tripped me up is because I feel like I have to deliver to 100% all the time, because there's almost like this element of, and I don't think others in the team would necessarily share this view, but I feel like I've wanted to prove 110% that I should be there and that I can do what I'm doing, and I think that just puts extra pressure on.
It's self-pressure that's exerted
exactly.
because of what you think others may be thinking.
And I think that
you had that trait anyway.
Yes.
Exam time, you'd beat yourself up for any opportunity you could. So
it just means you take the mistakes a bit harder. But I also think that it's not the worst discipline in the world to have.
No, definitely. So our second and final podcast we're going to refer to in this family segment is the story of Jim and Susie from Jimmy's Iced Coffees. And theirs is a remarkable story. And if you go back and listen to the whole story or watch the episode, you'll see that they talk about the whole story from startup to exit. And they are two contrasting characters you see during the course of the conversation. And this is why family can work so well in business. We had Susie, the analytical one, the thoughtful one, holding Jim to account. And we had Jim, who's that character, that gregarious individual who built the brand around, to begin with, his personality. And actually, we learned during the course of the conversation that they had to backtrack from that and build a brand around Jimmy's Iced Coffee itself. But anyway, enough of that episode. The two snippets that we're going to play for you are around an issue that they had with stock and the damage that potentially could cause to the business. And secondly, why they didn't take investment from Dragon's Den.
Was there ever a moment of doubt? Never a moment of doubt. Like we said earlier, in terms of just, it's always going to work. But you do kind of question yourself sometimes. And I think probably one of my darkest was when we had to throw away about 20 pallets of 1 litre product that was going off. And we thought everyone was going to love 1 litre iced coffee, but the iced coffee market was too small. People weren't willing to pay £3.50 for a litre of iced coffee because they only wanted to spend a little bit. So we ended up having to chuck loads, and we did our own, loaded up a van with pallets of iced coffee at a time, went to a commercial recycling centre in the pissing rain in the middle of winter, and we were like, what has gone wrong?
We literally poured about 40 grand's worth of stock all over the floor.
Just wondering, why, what are we actually doing? Is this still? It's like, it's still okay, but today's particularly pressing because we've still got loads of work to do, and we're stood in a recycling centre with like high-vis jackets on, watching this. This guy had a grabber, and he'd burst all the iced coffee on the floor of this commercial recycling centre, and he picked up a double mattress off a bin pile and just mopped it up like it was a sponge. It was that kind of colossal, the size of this operation. And we were kind of scratching our heads and we were thinking, I think that's probably where we came up with this phrase, which is like take 24, which is like just basically sleep on a decision before you go hell for leather on doing stuff. Susan and I are very impulsive people, and we did need to have someone just wind us back in to go, just think about this for a second. Why don't you just keep pushing your existing product range without expanding? And this is all stuff I would have said to myself if I'd had a
stop for a moment.
Yeah, and we had a couple of mentors, but no one regularly enough to go, what's happening? Actually, don't do that.
Yeah.
Trust me, just focus on keeping it as simple as humanly possible.
So I hope you're enjoying this very special episode of the Evolve to Succeed podcast. And if you're a regular listener, then hopefully it's a reminder of some of the things that you may have taken away during the course of 2024 when listening to the pod. But you may have missed some episodes, so go listen and reflect on the episodes that you've listened to and listen to the ones you've missed. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I hope you're enjoying this very special, fun episode. And again, go back, listen to the back catalogue, help us, support us. So please, if you're really enjoying the podcast, then do help us by rating, reviewing, subscribing to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
So we had approaches, from a very young age, actually, a young age of the business, and one got quite serious, and we actually said to each other, no, we're actually really happy. We're loving the journey at the moment, so thanks, but no thanks. Which, you sort of look back, and I'm glad we said no, because we were having too much fun at the time, and that's great, and it was good
It's a really good point, though.
It's good to recognise that. And equally, Dragon's Den was another one back in the day, early days. We turned up and did our interview with them, dressed in our morph suits and our carton dresses again. And the director was like, we absolutely want you on. You'll make great telly. This will be great. And then they offered it to us. And Jim was just like, absolutely no way are we going to be known to be the brand that made it because of Dragon's Den, like the reggae story. Yeah. And our roles were different then. So I was in sales and production, and I was just like, but we need the awareness, and this will give us the awareness, and that means we can make more product, and means we can pay Framptons, which mean, and Jim was absolutely like, no, we will make this on our own. I was like, okay. And twice they came back to us and were like, please come on. And I was like, no, really
I'm
sorry.
still really glad that we didn't.
I'm really glad we didn't, but it would have been a quicker success story. But then actually quicker doesn't mean you've got deeper foundations.
Yeah, quicker doesn't mean better,
no,
does it?
It doesn't.
Because it can also mean kind of, oh, you got it, and so we'll give you a listing, and then if it doesn't work, you're out, and then you're just dead.
Yeah, and if you weren't ready for that listing at that point.
Exactly, yeah.
No, that's right. I mean, getting a listing is great, but keeping that listing is where the hard work starts.
Is that a tougher challenge for somebody that's building a kind of,
absolutely
food and drink business, trying to get into the supermarkets? Keeping the listings the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's euphoric getting it, but then it's literally, that's when you are actually scared.
So our third theme is one of adventure and resilience. And, we talk generally that this podcast is about business owners, founders, leaders telling their story and journey, but I always think it's fascinating to hear from people in other walks of life that are doing remarkable things. And the two podcasts that we're going to talk about in terms of adventure do that, and our third podcast in this section that we're going to talk about is one of resilience. 3 remarkable stories. But let's kick off with the first one, which is Julie and Sally, which right now they are rowing across the Atlantic. So during the course of the conversation, we talk about the dedication and training need. We talk about their calorie burn and how they're going to get the food intake. We clearly talk about all the risks and the fact that effectively they're a cork bobbing along across the Atlantic. Do enjoy. Do you train for the sleep deprivation? Because we're all used to 6-8 hours sleep a night and a normal kind of rhythm and pattern, but your body's going to have to adjust to that.
You're kind of forced into that position. So you start that first week, 5 days, 4 or 5 days, just in that situation where you're just like, okay, well, this is it, and you just get into that routine. I think our bodies are quite good at catnapping, as humans are quite good at constant.
The first 2 weeks is going to be the hardest.
The tough.
Okay.
Because your body's going to adjust to it. You might be seasick. Also, getting away from La Gomera can be quite difficult.
Okay.
In yourself, you just need to get away. You need to just head south and get away as quickly as you can.
Okay.
So I think the first 2 to 3 weeks will be really hard on us, particularly me, Sally, and Ed. Mary's done this before, so she's a little bit
She's
more
done the
used
challenge before.
Twice before.
Twice, not this particular one, but she's
rowed across the Atlantic.
2 oceans. Yeah. She's done New York to Falmouth, and she did the Pacific.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she knows what's coming. We'll try and stay in a routine of breakfast, lunch, dinner, and that's the bulk of your calories.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll have sort of porridge and muesli, then lunch and dinner, and then in between you've got your snack packs. But each of us will have a different calorie requirement.
Okay.
So it's all based on your weight, and as long as you can get those calories in, you should, in theory, come back roughly the same weight.
Yeah.
If you do it right. Although there is an element of sweat, and
that's right.
And if you get seasick, then you may struggle with a little bit of weight. The average weight loss is 8 kilos.
Okay, that's significant
per person. Yeah,
fair amount, isn't it?
Yeah,
definitely.
But the safety team do highlight that if you get your nutrition right, you shouldn't come back too much lighter.
No. Okay. Exactly.
Yeah, we'll see.
I saw some of the safety kit on the boat. Like the lines that attach you to the boat, and there is quite a high risk of capsize, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a risk of capsize. It's not as high as you think.
Okay.
They do capsize, and they are designed to right themselves.
Right.
But they're very well designed.
Yeah.
They're like a cork on the water.
Yeah.
They're very sturdy boats, albeit they're light on the water.
Yeah.
But you wear a harness. You're clipped on to the boat. Life jacket as and when required.
For those that know me, know that I love cycling, and completed my own kind of mini adventure this year, cycling from Land's End to John O'Groats. So our last episode of the year before this one that we've had on the podcast is James Benson King, and he's a cyclist that cycled across the whole America continent. It's a remarkable story, and in his conversation we talked about that difference between owning your successes and owning your challenges as well. And I was really keen to understand what scared him the most. Because, that's a sign of strength and resilience and determination. And when I listened to that, you clearly had this goal in mind. You had this objective, not just to do the trip, but to do the trip and cycle or self-propel yourself the whole way. Again, in life and in business, we all have those goals, but sometimes we can become distracted. We can let them go by the wayside. We can lose focus, can't we?
Yeah.
So what lessons, tips, ideas, thoughts would you have for just somebody in everyday life or somebody running a business about how they could adopt that kind of mindset into their world?
For me, the overarching theme for my trip was ownership. So it was owning the successes, but owning the challenges as well. I think it would have been very easy within that moment to quit if I didn't feel like I had ownership of the whole trip. It's very easy to complete a continent and enjoy the fruits of your success, but when it comes down to 60-mile-an-hour headwind, can you own that challenge? And do you care enough? Are you emotionally invested enough to push through that? So life and business will offer these challenges. And if you have ownership over your goal, then I think it allows you to push into these darker places and push through. Whereas if you don't feel like you have ownership over that, you're not empowered to take on some of these big challenges. So ownership for me is definitely a big one. It's something that when I worked at JP, I would try and instill in my staff, because a lot of the time they may have a goal, but if it's somebody else's to handhold for like part of the process, they would feel like, I don't need to talk to them. I don't need to own that communication. It's like, well, they don't understand the impact they're having on you. You need to own that communication with them. You need to take the goal to them. Not necessarily handhold them, but make them see your point of view, understand what needs to happen in order for you to succeed. Because if you don't own every aspect of your goal, all of the challenges, all of the setbacks, then achieving it will become harder and harder.
And what moment were you most scared on the trip?
There was a moment in Belize. So Mexico on paper everybody had told me to be really, really scared, really vigilant. And there was one particular day where I ended up being in the middle of a cartel lockdown as El Chapo's son had been captured by the Mexican government. Okay. And I found myself within 10 kilometers of the cartel stronghold unknowingly and passed through I passed through a roadblock where they'd exploded cars and felled trees, and I was kind of lifting my bike over these things, but somehow never felt truly at risk, because I knew even if the cartel saw me, I'd heard from others that they're not bothered in cycle tours. They know you're not a risk. But when I entered into Belize, there was a different energy in the air. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And there was one particular night where I was trying to camp down by a riverbed and was chatting to this local guy and, said, is it safe for me to camp here? Just a fairly normal question. Most people that I'd encountered on the trip so far would just say, yeah, it's fine. It's a river in the middle of nowhere. And this guy told me to leave now. He's like, do not camp here, and was like almost kind of pushing me away. It was about 6 p.m. So I got back on my bike, and there was a nearby Mayan village. That was the closest thing I could see. So I kind of cycled over to there and just asked if I could camp with this family. And they then told me an unfortunate story about how a British girl had been murdered by that river 10 years earlier. She was a relief worker, and they'd seen her withdraw money to pay some people, and they'd killed her. And I was very thankful to have the support of that family, and they were incredibly helpful. But that was the most scared I was on the whole trip, I'd say.
So I may be sat here right now in a Santa hat, full of smiles, but some of our conversations on the podcast do go deep, and this particular conversation with Mark Darcy was a remarkable one. And we talked about that risk of suicide, the risk of suicide in men in particular. And this first snippet that we have from Mark is really profound and thought-provoking. And, perhaps, male and female, particularly males, aren't very good at sharing their feelings, and suicide rates from men, middle-aged men in particular, are extremely high. This is why I say it's a crass question, but I'm going to ask it, Mark. What stopped you following through on that action, and what advice would you give to somebody that maybe be listening to this that feels that low?
What advice would I give, and what stopped me doing it? What stopped me actually doing it was thinking about my son.
Okay.
And how he would cope with it. At that point, crying my eyes out. So I think I was gripping on to, I didn't care about myself anymore, Warren.
You'd given up sort of that hope on you.
I literally had, but I cared about my son. Because remember, I didn't see this amazing, beautiful life I have now. Yeah. All I seen was the darkness. Yeah. And when you wake up every morning for months and months, and all you start doing is crying, it's tough. It wears you down. Some of the adventures I've done in my life are quite extreme. People say, how do you do them? And I'm like, that's nothing to what I went through with my mental health. Nothing, not a touch on it. So I think it was definitely my son, and there was a little tiny mini bit of hope.
A little bit of light.
That tiny, tiny bit of light, which I say to people, grab onto. And what advice do I give to people that I work with mental health and talk to about mental health is be very careful. You're going to make a permanent decision on temporary thoughts. And them temporary thoughts might not be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
And life is special, and it might not feel it now. But one day it may. And there's no coming back from that.
Yeah.
And that's the advice I give to people.
Through his own experiences, Mark has developed ways in which he copes. And one of those ways of coping is actually split his life into thirds. So let's hear what that means to Mark.
And then I set up my own group called the New Forest Wellbeing Group. And it's beautiful. It just fills my heart with so much joy. It's just helped so many people. It's got nearly 1,000 members in 18 months. I put on events. They fill up within like an hour. 30 people. I have like 40 on the waiting list, and that's nothing to do with me whatsoever. That's just, if you create a lovely, kind, loving environment that people can come and talk from the heart.
Yeah.
And this is what can be achieved. You know the saying, you surround yourself by idiots, you become an idiot. If you surround yourself by kind, loving people, guess what can happen?
Yeah.
So that was a beautiful project I started.
And I love this new philosophy that you have on life. So please share that with our listeners.
So now I spend my time very differently. I spend a third of my time earning, a third of it serving, and a third of it learning. And that's my sort of top level vision, balance, whatever we want to call that. But that keeps me very centered. And it's made me truly happy.
In the course of our conversations, I often ask, is there some book, podcast, something that's moved you? And I did that during the course of my conversation with Mark, and he came out with this one particular book and the message that it gave him.
So when I started to understand what was happening with me, and I wasn't the only one out there, that really did help. But I do remember an actual moment of change when I picked up this book, and I was around my friend's house, and he said he was reading it to his kids. And I thought to myself, well, that should have put me off, but it didn't. I picked it up, just literally opened the book up, and it's called The Boy, the Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And it's a beautiful book, and it's one of my favourite books. Now it is anyway. And I opened it up, and the boy turns around to the mole, and he says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And he said, "All I want to be is kind." And I just remember this overwhelming feeling, sense of, that's what I've always wanted. That's all I want to be, kind. And that then made me go out and seek a lot of support. And I spent 2.5 years, Warren, just working on myself.
Some people are just born to be business owners. Some people transcend to that way of life during the course of their life and their journey. So our final theme is that of employee to ownership, and those that perhaps found themselves in that place of ownership unexpectedly. The first of the 3 podcasts we're going to talk about is Adam Lewis from BBD Boom. And during the course of the podcast, if you go back, he tells his story and why he went from being an employee to starting and founding his own business with his co-founder, Emma Lynch. But we also talked about systems, processes, system thinking during the course of the conversation. And they are the snippets that we have now pulled out for you. When you look back now, what are some of the lessons, Adam, that you've learned along the way?
Well, I mean, the lessons are, first of all, it's been a partnership with Emma and I. So I think if you're going to have a business partner, I think we spent a lot of time understanding each other, and we relied a lot on sort of psychometric tests and those kind of those things like personality types to kind of really understand how we operate.
Okay.
But fundamentally, we brought complementary skills.
Yeah, because you are 2 different personalities.
Because I know you work with Emma.
Yeah, she's part of the Evolved Peer Groups and that kind of thing.
Which she's got a lot of value from. She's really, really loved being part of that.
That's nice to know.
And it's benefited the business without doubt. So understanding how we work together to get the best out of each other and complementary skills. I think that's a lesson that I've learned, and I didn't know that going into it. I think the other thing then is having a sales and marketing engine. Having that focus on, where are we getting leads? Are we talking every day about generating leads? Are we talking every day about closing deals? Having sales conversations, having that mindset is crucial, and it creates friction because we've got to do the work, we've got to look after the team, we've got to do all these other things. But if we're not bringing money through the door, all that's irrelevant.
I had a non-exec Mike, and he used to say you've always got to be putting that oil and that petrol into the engine 100%. To keep it running.
But I also think with culture, and this is something that Emma, again, if it was left to me, I don't think our culture would be quite what it is. But Emma has been able to bring that thinking to it, and it's the small things that matter.
Yeah.
It's remembering everybody's birthday. people's anniversary.
Yeah.
They've been here a year. I often get texts from people saying, "Thank you so much for the chocolates for the anniversary," and I'm like,
"Thank you, Emma."
Thank you, Emma, for remembering and getting them delivered on time. So it's those little things as well. Now we've got things like the Culture Club, so we kind of devolve the idea that people want to create events like the book club and get-togethers and virtual quizzes, and I'm actually missing the monthly quiz to be here, Warren, which is just as well because I normally lose, especially when Emma chooses a subject, because it's kind of like TV dramas. But now it has a life of its own, and we want the team to kind of really own the culture and to move it forward.
So there's been a lot of talk about businesses transcending from sort of entrepreneurial founder ownership to employee ownership trust. And we've had a number of those on the podcast, but this year we had a great episode with Terry and Jess from Rubicon. And they joined the business as some young, hungry school leavers in their early 20s. And they've got on a complete journey with that business, such that when it did transcend to employee ownership, they have become co-founders. So we talked to them about what that journey's like, and having known each other for a long time, what it's like for them to be co-managing directors of a business that's owned by its employees.
And what do you think made, because they were a strong partnership, weren't they? And you must look at them as a new partnership leading the business now, for the things you could learn from them. So when you look at that partnership that was so successful between them, what lessons do you take from that?
This is something we've looked at quite closely, actually. And I think for me, probably the most important factor is each having ownership and accountability of particular areas of the business. And if that's something that Jess is looking after, that's something that Jess is looking after. And it's ensuring that you're not muddling, and that each of you have your own areas of responsibility, and that's something that Lloyd and JB had in place from the onset.
Yeah, and trust as well. I think that's really important to know that the areas that we have agreed on to be accountable for, that I'll know that Terry is on top of those, and he'll know that I'm on top of them.
You're going to do what you're going to
do. We don't expect to always agree. There's always going to be different viewpoints, different ways of thinking about things. But if we always had the same view, there'd be one of us too many doing this job.
Yeah, absolutely.
So our final two shorts from Jess and Terry are really about their people. And, they are a recruitment agency, so they get that people piece and that people thing. But they talk about giving their people time and space to be great. And they also talk about letting people take ownership themselves. So two great snippets coming up from Jess and Terry.
Especially in an employee-owned business, really that, the thought process, the decision needs to include more people than perhaps just the two people or the leadership team or whoever's running the business. So just, a few examples. I mean, we've looked at our dress code recently, post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Perhaps, our dress code that was written, or dress code policy that was written 15 odd years ago, was a little bit archaic.
Yeah.
Didn't suit
the modern
the
world.
demographic of our business. But equally, post-pandemic, maybe a few things had crept in that certainly were a far cry from the original policy. So it's, but actually Terry and I sitting there thinking, gosh, do we really want to be spending our time working out a dress code policy, which we don't know how on board the rest of the business is going to be on it, and what views they might have, how strongly they might feel about certain things. I know. Let's push this out to the council and they can solicit feedback from the rest of the business. People are good. People have got a lot of skills, even if they don't have loads of experience. Just the amount of time that people spend doing things doesn't necessarily define their capability. And so even sometimes in your business, you've got inexperienced people, but they've got the raw competencies and talent and aptitude to do certain things, and you let them loose and you trust them, give them the right tools, then they can really, do remarkable things. And I think that's been one of the most satisfying things for us this year.
Yeah. And do you think you would have done that anyway as leaders? Do you think that's your leadership style, or do you think the Employee Ownership Trust makes that happen?
Definitely employee ownership plays a part in it, because it is about the voice of other people. So if somebody speaks up and puts their hand up... I was going to say, do
you think people put their hand up more because they feel it's employee only?
Yeah, one of our main objectives for the last 6 months, Q3 and Q4 of this year, has been collaboration. And we've always been, Rubicon's always been about working together. And even individuals within the company, they don't have their own individual targets. It's team-based targets. So recruiters work together to achieve a common goal.
So our 12th and final pod of Christmas is the story of Keith Reilly from Alphatronics. And his is a remarkable story and journey again, told in such great way by him during the course of the conversation. And we find out actually that, he lost the job, joined Alphatronics, eventually bought into the business, and is now transcending that business again. But there's a great segment, and it's the second segment of 3 that we're going to play for you, where he talks about how we can work well under pressure. And we often talk about stress and pressure and building resilience. And actually there's a big definition between pressure and stress and how we do work well under pressure. And, Keith tells this beautifully, as I say, in that second snippet. But there's 3 snippets from Keith, all providing us with great value.
So I started studying then manufacturing, and particularly Japanese manufacturing techniques. That became my little interest. Now, after 7 years, the American company got bought out by a French company who said, we've got people in Europe, we don't need him, goodbye. It was all very quick, the way it tends to be with American organizations. And so that was the end of me. And rather than going and taking another sort of very basic job, I'd got a little bit more education behind me then, and I started to present myself. I go, my name's Keith, and I'm studying world-class manufacturing techniques. I'm interested in how the Japanese have got ahead and indeed won. And of course, if you go back to this time, we're talking about 1990. The Japanese were the superstars.
They were at the pinnacle,
absolutely,
weren't they?
Of manufacturing. There was nobody else to follow really in the world who was doing it quite like them. Well, I was unemployed for a bit, and I did a little bit of consultancy here and there. I did about a year in the end. I did some more training, and I did about a year with an electronics company in Poole. And I was quite successful, and I sort of started to put myself about a little bit more. And eventually I got poached, if you like, and offered a job here at Alphatronics. So I joined Alphatronics with the remit to improve the manufacturing system.
Because you've been that kind of shareholder, MD, some frustration, but a bit of autonomy.
Yes.
There was a change when it is effectively your name over the door, isn't there?
Yes, so I think exhilarating is probably the best way to describe it. I think we all perform our best whenever the pressure is placed upon us. I think it's a very, very important human characteristic. I'm not saying everybody's like that.
I'm not sure
but
we all
most people are. And if you go into the business community, and you, Warren, will be very familiar, you'll meet a lot of people, of course, like that. I think most of them are. We all pull rabbits out of the hat whenever our backs are against the wall. And whenever you owe an awful lot of money, actually, whenever you see the economic world crumpling beside you, actually you learn to perform.
You dig in as well, don't you?
You dig
focus.
Yes.
You have that focus, passion, and belief were the words that I normally talk about in those scenarios, because you've got something to aim towards, or something to avoid or move away from.
You have an obligation, and that obligation sits higher than most of the other obligations. That is debt to the bank.
What was your nature and behaviour, and what type of MD were you?
Yes, I think I was definitely very much hands-on, but I always recognised very, very clearly, and from quite early on, that my skills were not the best in every area. They were only the best and only even good in some areas. So whenever it became to sales and marketing and things like that, I would offer leadership, I would offer mentoring, but I had other people who had much greater instinct for actually getting out into the market, creating sales, customer liaison than I would have myself. For a long time, I managed the shop floor also. Eventually, I handed that over, but that was because my core expertise, if you like, was in the relationship with the individuals who put the products together.
So, I really hope you've enjoyed the 12 Pods of Christmas. And there's 12 episodes there, but there's plenty more that you could go to and listen to and find out more about people's journeys, business, resilience, adventure, all of these kind of things. So go listen to that back catalogue. And if you do like our podcast, please really help us. Subscribe, rate, review, do all of those things you can to support us. Give us some kindness at Christmas. So all there is really left to do is to say, actually, if you're thinking about planning for your next year for 2025, just remind you that a few weeks ago we released the podcast from me, Becky and David, the Evolve team, effectively about what we would do to reflect on 2024 and plan for 2025. So a great episode if you're in that mindset during the Christmas period. And therefore, all I'm going to do is say thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. Thank you for supporting us. I hope you're enjoying the episodes. We're clearly having fun and enjoying putting this pod out. So have a great family Christmas. Have a great time in the new year. And we'll see you on the 13th of January for our first episode in 2025.